So there'll be a premium on being close to others, either on a campus or in a city where you're close to others. And that would cost $70,000 a year. And then you can have the other end of the spectrum, which is a sitting at home looking into a screen for 2 or 6 hours a week and try to catch up yourself. And that'll be very cheap. And then you'll see a group of students that can afford or are willing to go into deep debt to get the college experience and everything that comes around that. But you will then have a massive group of people that used to have access to that, but now you'll see a split.
I'm here today with my friend Christian Madsberg. He's an author. He's written books like Moment of Clarity, Sense Making. He's a professor at the New School for Social Research. He's been a management consultant, and I'm glad you're here today. But I have to say, this is not a moment of clarity, and I can't make sense of anything. That's why I needed you to come in and talk to me today. How do you see the challenge?
Well, first of all, clarity. It seems like a lot of things are clearer.
Unmasked.
Yeah, exactly.
Unmasked,
so,
yes.
so you could say in sociology, there's this concept of breaching. So it's kind of a methodological trick. So if you want to see how a rule in society works, you break it. Technically, basically. So if you want to understand how standing in line works, how we organize ourselves around standing in line, you break the line in order to see how people react. And nobody's thought about the rules before someone broke the rules of it.
What's a violation feel like? Stirs
Exactly.
your imagination.
It could also be distance standing, how far you stand from each other. It's very natural, completely normal for us, but if somebody stands a little too close or a little too far away, we understand that there are rules for distance standing.
Yes.
And in a way, the pandemic has been one giant breaching exercise. Like all the things that we just took for granted, all the rules we knew, we didn't think about, but they were certainly there about what work is, what kind of priorities we have as a society, the role of education, our relationship to our kids. Suddenly, because it was taken away from us, suddenly it's unmasked, it's sort of unmasked, it's laid bare and uncovered. And you can really see what our priorities are. So in a way, it's quite clear.
And that illusion of individual liberty.
Yes.
My rights,
Yeah.
my right
Yeah.
to infect you by not wearing a mask in a bar or a restaurant is not something you'll accept
Right, exactly.
now with the pandemic, when before it seemed latent, like there was no danger.
Right. And in a way, I mean, I've always been a big proponent of the liberal arts and the humanities in general. I think we need them. We need history and philosophy and moral thinking, and we need, language, culture, understanding of culture. And if there's ever a moment, in my life at least, where we needed that ability and that guidance, it's now, I would say.
It's an interesting phenomenon because many people of the progressive realm berate the Trump followers for their cynicism about expertise, their lack of trust in government. And you're right, at the end game, we need those things. But we've just been through a period where expertise has largely been unmasked as failing.
I agree.
Where the power and the authority advocated for a system that created very, very narrow prosperity, very narrow and deep for a few people, and left a whole lot of things in tatters, and left a whole lot of people thinking their children weren't going to be better off.
I mean, I've been working in companies my whole life,
Yes.
and now I'm spending time in universities, and it's a new thing for me to really see it. I've had sort of a long period where I wasn't so involved in the academic world, and I'm quite frankly surprised by how it's organized. And it seems like 150 years ago we made the research university, and the research university has these silos: sociology, anthropology, economics, and so on. And they become so specialized and have their own language and talk only to themselves in their own magazines and their own reviews and their own publication with a language that nobody else outside would understand, and with an epistemology that only suits that area. And then they hate each other. And have lost the ability to speak to one
Rival
another.
tribes.
And that is unhelpful, I think. and boring, quite frankly. And so I think this ability of cutting across, which is what politics should be, or what just a liberal arts education should be, has been largely lost. So that's one thing. The other thing is, my whole life I've heard that the humanities is in danger. And that has been true all along, I imagine. But right now, it's really happening. It's really happening that the departments that teach history or English or areas in the humanities are just done.
Is
There's
that
no more
because the student body in this tumultuous context are terrified, so they go to what I will call vocational tools
Yes.
rather than spiritual exploration or philanthropic-minded, nurturing, the kind of instincts that have a broad consciousness are just set aside because we got to survive this one.
It's that, but it's also just you get if you want to be an academic, or if you want to be a scholar, then you have to specialize very deeply.
Yes.
And that means you get educated out of the ability to do lateral thinking.
Yes.
And it's built in the system.
Yes.
So the more successful you are as an academic, the less your ability is to do exactly what we need, which is sort of cutting across.
One of the things the humanities teaches you is that mysterious, quizzical irresolution that's always in front of you in the world, and you want to explore what you might call the yin and yang to be wiser.
Or human truth, right? That there's human truth in music or literature and so on. I think another thing, which is completely fair for students and their parents, is that it's just very expensive.
It's just expensive?
It's just ridiculously expensive to go to school. So if you do that and you want to spend either spend your parents' money or go in deep debt, then your risk profile changes and you become very risk averse and you look for something that can give you, a salary when you come out. And I completely get that. The problem is then you end up with people that are not exploring broadly and are not taking the time to read history and things that are outside the curriculum and things that are not bang on what they need to do in order to do well inside the system. And so I get that. I can really empathize with that, but it's just unfortunate because the result is that you get a group of people that have vocational training.
Yeah, well, I've been looking at what you might call literary history for precedents about the kind of challenges we face now. And the great woman, Jane Jacobs from Toronto, who wrote a lot about cities and the transformation of society, her last book was called Dark Age Ahead. And as I was approaching the presidential election, that title just grabbed me. And her third chapter is called Education versus Credentializing.
Right.
And it was about how fear-driven despair became the basis for large tuitions. What an economist would say is, when you're afraid you have inelastic demand, and people can hold you up because you're afraid of the alternative.
Yeah, exactly.
And, but she was talking about how people would not be looking deeply and broadly at things like climate change because of their, what I call inherent caution and conformity.
We just don't have time for despair. And we don't have time for staying in the darkness. We don't have time to fix our ability to make decisions because, we have a political system that people are not convinced by on both sides.
On left and right.
Yeah, and very, very angry at each other. You have a technology situation where you have vast amounts of power centralized in a
very
group
concentrated.
and that we need to figure out. And there's the new technology developments where technology can do new things that we need to consider from morally and societally and so on. There's a inequality. If there's something the pandemic really laid bare, it is the inequality that it's also produced
It's
8
produced,
million
but it illuminates the consequences of inequality as well.
and the fragility of big parts of our society. And then, of course, you have the pandemic itself, our ability to make decisions around big events like that. So you have a series of questions where we actually need the humanities deeply. Not more than ever. I suppose you needed it in the 1940s as well, or 1920s. But we really need it now to help us guide about human behavior, about moral decisions, about the role of technology in our lives, around politics. And that happens at the same time where the social sciences and the humanities, liberal arts colleges are just collapsing. So you have this trend of need for that kind of guidance, and then you have a collapse of liberal arts colleges, history programs, philosophy programs, and so on. And that's kind of counter to what we need.
What is thriving? Computer science or just
computer science, engineering, of course, right? Yeah. And fantastic things is happening there. In what's happening in the life sciences, it's a spectacular technology that's happening, and we need that, and we should actually fund that even more. I don't think we've reached the limit in any way of how much we should spend on education and research. I think we're not even close, but the life sciences are spectacularly successful, and at the same time, you have our stories and our history and our moral guidance being defunded and collapsing at the same time. And it's really real now. It's basically not possible to run a proper liberal arts college without having very wealthy donors or a big endowment. You can't run these businesses, which they're really businesses in America.
First of all, dormitories were a source of revenue.
Right.
People aren't living at the campus any longer.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a big hole there.
Yeah.
But as, I guess, school becomes expensive, people are saying, I can take Zoom classes for $200.
Exactly.
Some of them are offering credits now.
Yeah, exactly.
Usually it's the proximity to a brilliant human being that you're willing to pay a premium for to become educated.
Or the other students, right? I mean, how about those?
Yeah.
I mean, my students are miserable and lonely.
Yes.
And they sit in their little rooms and they look into a screen all day and try to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. Yeah. That's not an education. Yeah. So you can go on Coursera for $200 and get something, but you can't get what's sort of co-curricular, everything that's not bang-on curricular, everything that's around it, which really is what matters. So there'll be a premium on being close to others, either on a campus or in a city where you're close to others, and that would cost $70,000 a year. And then you can have the other end of the spectrum, which is a sitting at home looking into a screen for 2 or 6 hours a week and try to catch up yourself, and that'll be very cheap. And then you'll see a group of students that can afford or are willing to go into deep debt to get the college experience and everything that comes around that, which is wonderful to have access to if you can. But you will then have a massive group of people that used to have access to that in different ways that we could fund it through proper distribution of access to education. But now you'll see a split, and it'll be even worse. There'll be even more unequal access to good education.
And it's not just what I'll call learning SAT score kind of stuff. It's actually mental health that's also
absolutely
the bifurcation in mental health from the environments and fears of disease and all kinds of things interact here.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, we can all pray that vaccines and lockdowns will put this to a significant extent behind us within a few months.
Yeah.
But
that'd be nice.
Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be nice though.
But I think the awakening that you described, the unmasking, is showing a whole lot of what I'll call unmet necessary demands in society.
Yeah. It is very, I mean, for me, it's been one of the most interesting, one of the most clarifying periods of my life, to be able to see our priorities being just unmasked. And as a scholar, that is, of course, on a background of deep despair, but as a scholar, you see a different data set that you could never have gotten to because it was just covered up. And now you can really see it, especially in the first months of the pandemic. The way people reacted was different. When you took away people's work life, when you took away people's dating life, you know, falling in love as a student, or when you took away people's access to cities and cultural life and so on, you can really feel what it meant, right? It's only when it's taken away that you understand it. Just like if you lose your phone in a cab somewhere, you really understand what a phone is to you. You know, you really understand the roles because the way it's integrated into your life.
Yes.
And it's kind of what happened. But my students, I mean, when it comes to, there was a student of mine that said the other day that she had standards for her love life before the pandemic. They're quite high. Who she wanted to meet. She had a series of standards and criteria.
Yeah.
And now, because she's been so distant and so taken away from, she says, I just want connection. I just want some level of connection. And that's, of course, extreme if you're 19 and you just want to have a dating life.
Yes.
But I think it's a metaphor for a lot of things that's happening to work life and, you know, social life and so on. And we really understand what it means when you can see it taken away.